"Get up or get out. This seat isn't for you." The words didn't just echo, they fractured the silence of the cabin like glass under pressure. Every head turned. Flight attendants froze mid-step. Even the hum of the engine felt interrupted. She didn't move. A black woman in a navy suit, posture carved from steel, eyes steady as stone. One hand rested on the fold-out tray, fingers still on the corner of a magazine. No flinch, no protest, just stillness that unsettled the entire row. The captain stood over her, shoulders squared, uniform pristine, his voice carrying the authority of the cockpit but dripping with bias. Behind him, a man in a pale blue polo leaned in, eager to back him up. "She doesn't belong here. You should check her ticket." His words weren't sharp, they were smug, sharpened by years of thinking no one would question him. Phones came alive. A young woman across the aisle lifted her camera just enough, whispering to the person beside her, "This is wrong." A ripple ran down the cabin, confusion, unease, the beginning of something no airline script had prepared for. But she, the woman in seat 3 Ampere, didn't react. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was a storm held in place. Passengers felt it in their chests, though no words were spoken. Even the captain shifted his weight, as if the weight of his own accusation was heavier than expected. This wasn't the first time she'd heard it, not the first time a uniform mistook her calm for weakness. She remembered 23, standing in line for her first business class upgrade. A clerk looked her up and down and said, "Not the image we're looking for." She'd smiled then, too, not because it was funny, but because she knew it would happen again. And here it was thousands of feet above the ground, with more eyes watching. The cabin air grew thick, metallic, almost electric. A man 2 rows back muttered, "She should move before security comes." Another voice, softer but firm, countered, "She bought that seat." The captain leaned closer, voice lower but laced with threat. "Either comply or you're banned from flying." The phrase fell heavy, final, like a sentence handed down in a courtroom. But she did not budge. Her gaze cut through him, not loud, not pleading, just a mirror forcing him to see himself. "And now, before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here." Now, back to the woman in 3 Ampere, who was about to turn an airplane cabin into a stage for truth. Seat 3 Ampere looked ordinary gray leather, a tray table folded, a thin airline blanket tucked into the corner, but the woman sitting there was anything but ordinary. No entourage, no flashing jewelry, no designer bag on her lap, just a navy suit cut clean and understated, dark loafers, and a quiet confidence that didn't ask for attention but commanded it anyway. Her name, though no one around her knew it yet, was Maya Jordan, 39 years old, founder and majority shareholder of one of the fastest-growing aviation investment firms in the United States. Her company's portfolio included fuel supply, aircraft leasing, and yes, an ownership stake in the very airline whose captain was now standing over her. But she hadn't boarded this flight to be recognized. She had boarded to see with her own eyes how her customers were treated when there was no spotlight, no press release, no announcement that the boss was on board. That's why she chose to travel alone, dressed down, ticket booked under her own name with no corporate flags. It wasn't a trap, it was a test. From the outside, she was just another passenger. No assistant trailing behind her with files, no security detail, not even a laptop out. Only a leather folio resting against her leg, and a boarding pass she had tucked into the seat back pocket. Passengers around her had already started filling in their own story. The man in the polo shirt who had leaned toward the captain whispered to his wife, "She probably printed a fake boarding pass." The woman 2 rows back shook her head, muttering, "They wouldn't treat someone in a suit like that unless something was wrong." Bias wrapped itself in assumptions, cloaked as logic. Maya heard it all. She didn't shift, didn't speak, didn't rise to defend herself. Her stillness was deliberate because she understood something no one else in that cabin did. Silence forces truth to expose itself. The longer she waited, the clearer their prejudice became. This wasn't new. At 28, she had walked into a luxury car dealership in Los Angeles, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. A salesman waved her off, told her the cars were out of her budget. She bought 2 that afternoon, one for herself, one for her mother. At 34, she tried to check into a hotel in Chicago after a red-eye. The desk clerk insisted her black card looked suspicious. She ended up acquiring the hotel chain 2 years later. Now, at 39, she found herself again in familiar territory. Not the first time someone thought she didn't belong in a seat she had already paid for, but it would be the last time it went unanswered. The cabin lights buzzed faintly above, casting a sterile glow on the polished aisle floor. Every movement felt amplified the rustle of newspapers, the ding of a phone being switched to airplane mode, the soft clearing of a throat from somewhere behind her. And over it all, the captain's presence loomed, his authority unchallenged except by the silent woman in front of him. He thought he was looking at a passenger to be disciplined. What he didn't realize was that he was staring down his own employer. And for Maya Jordan, the test had just begun. The captain didn't move away. His frame filled the narrow aisle, arms locked behind his back like he was delivering a verdict. "We have procedures," he said, tone clipped. "And procedures don't bend because you look confident in a seat you didn't pay for." Maya said nothing. Her gaze didn't even rise to meet him. That silence, that refusal to argue, burned hotter than a raised voice ever could. The man in the pale blue polo leaned farther across the aisle, voice loud enough for 3 rows to hear. "Come on, Captain, don't waste time. She's stalling. People like that know how to play games. Move her before it gets messy." His wife smirked behind her glass of sparkling water as if the show was free entertainment. A flight attendant, younger, hair pulled tight into a bun, stepped forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, economy is just down the aisle. We'll reassign your seat. Please don't create an incident." Her words were soft, but her posture said otherwise, an order disguised as courtesy. Another attendant, older, leaned into the moment with less restraint. "First class isn't a trial run," he said, his voice sharp. "You don't just walk in and pretend you belong." His badge caught the overhead light, flashing like an emblem of authority. Passengers glanced up, saw the insignia, and some nodded, convinced by symbols rather than truth. A murmur started, low and spreading. "Maybe she's scamming. They wouldn't push if it wasn't serious. Why doesn't she just move?" From the back row, a teenage boy whispered to his mother, "But her ticket scanned green. I saw it." The mother hushed him quickly, eyes darting, not ready to be part of the storm. The young woman with the phone across the aisle pressed record. The red light glowed against her fingers. "This doesn't look right," she said, almost to herself, but the words carried. A man beside her whispered, "Don't get involved." But her lens was already catching the moment the captain leaned closer, his voice dropping into something colder. "Last warning." The air thickened. Even the sound of the jet bridge latching outside seemed to vanish. Every breath in the cabin felt shallow, waiting. Maya remained motionless. No raised voice, no plea, no bargaining, just stillness. That stillness felt dangerous because it denied the crew what they wanted: compliance, apology, submission. In their silence, passengers filled the void with their own conclusions. A woman in pearls shook her head. "If she really belonged here, she'd prove it already." The man in polo chuckled. "Exactly. Talk is cheap. Real clients don't hide." The younger attendant stepped closer, hand half raised as if to guide Maya out of her seat, but she didn't touch her, not yet. Something about the calm radiating from 3 Ampere made her hesitate. And then the words dropped, sharp as a gavel. "You're holding up paying customers." The older attendant's voice cracked through the cabin, framing Maya not as a guest but as an obstacle, a thief of time and space. A few passengers nodded in agreement, their sympathy leaning toward authority. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the imbalance. The camera kept recording. Maya finally looked up, not at the captain, not at the attendants, but at the cabin itself. Her eyes swept across the rows, steady, unblinking. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence itself was a question. Who here decides who belongs? And the question lingered, heavy as turbulence, waiting for the next collision. The aisle felt narrower now, crowded not by bodies but by accusation. The captain's shadow lingered over Maya's seat, his authority pressing down like cabin pressure before a storm. The older attendant crossed his arms, foot-tapping impatiently. The younger one still hovered, unsure whether to obey orders or step back. The man in the polo leaned forward, waiting for a spectacle, and yet Maya Jordan didn't move. Her hands rested gently on the fold-out tray, palms open, a gesture so subtle it seemed almost ceremonial. Her shoulders straightened, not rigid, but composed like marble carved to endure centuries of weather. She inhaled once, slowly, deliberately, and exhaled without a word. The silence unsettled them more than shouting ever could. Shouting would have confirmed their expectations, would have painted her as disruptive, volatile. But her calm, her refusal to fit the narrative forced them to confront themselves. The young woman filming across the aisle whispered, "She hasn't even spoken." Her camera trembled in her grip, not from fear but from the weight of what it was capturing. The man beside her muttered, "That's the problem. They want her to snap." Maya's gaze flicked briefly toward the window. Outside, the tarmac shimmered with heat. Ground crew moving carts like ants under the fluorescent floodlights. She let her eyes linger there, a reminder to herself. Storms look smaller from above. She had learned that at 29, when investors laughed her out of a boardroom, she didn't argue then either. She bought their company 4 years later. The captain cleared his throat, mistaking her silence for hesitation. "We can end this quietly if you cooperate," he said, voice low but sharp. His words dangled like bait, but Maya didn't bite. Her stillness spread into the cabin. A woman 3 rows back lowered her magazine, eyes narrowing. A man with a laptop closed the screen, his expression caught between skepticism and curiosity. Even the teenage boy who had whispered earlier leaned forward, waiting for her to break the spell. The older attendant grew restless. "Why isn't she answering?" he demanded, louder now, projecting authority for the audience of passengers. "If she's legitimate, she'd show proof." Maya remained unmoved. She let the accusation hang in the air, heavy, unanswered, so that everyone else had to sit with it. The tactic wasn't new. She had used it in negotiations, in boardrooms, in depositions. Silence isn't weakness, it's a mirror. And right now, the crew was staring at their own reflection. The younger attendant's hand hovered closer, almost grazing Maya's arm. But then she hesitated, drawn back by the calm radiating from seat 3 Ampere. The passengers felt it too, that uncanny sense that the quietest person in the room was somehow in control. The man in the polo grew impatient, his voice cracking with mockery. "She can't answer because she doesn't belong. Simple as that." He chuckled, loud enough for the cabin to hear. But no one laughed with him. Maya lifted her chin slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. "I hear you. I just don't value you enough to respond." He looked away first. The silence deepened, transforming from absence of sound into a force of its own. And as the cabin held its breath, passengers began to realize something. Maybe the one not speaking was the only one telling the truth. The silence broke, not from Maya, but from the click of a camera app. The young woman across the aisle tilted her phone, red light blinking. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper, but it carried through the tense air. "This isn't right, I'm recording." The captain turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Put that away, ma'am. This is an internal matter." His words were stern, but they cracked at the edges, revealing something underneath. Unease. The young woman didn't lower her phone. "Internal?" she asked. She showed her ticket. "You tore it up. That's not protocol." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin, quiet, hesitant, but there. 2 rows back, the teenage boy leaned forward again. "Mom, I saw her scan in. The light was green." His mother hushed him, but this time she didn't sound certain. Her eyes lingered on Maya, then on the captain, as if replaying the last 5 minutes in her mind. A businessman with silver hair shifted in his seat, closing his laptop. "I've flown this airline for 20 years, he muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Never seen a situation handled like this." His tone wasn't confrontational, but it cut deep authority, challenging authority. The older attendant bristled. "Passengers should stay out of it. This is a security concern." But the lens of the young woman's phone didn't waver. The soft hum of recording had become its own form of resistance. Around the cabin, more phones appeared, discreet at first, then openly raised. Dozens of tiny red dots blinking like watchful eyes. Maya still hadn't spoken. Her calm face reflected faintly in the window beside her, the night sky beyond turning into a dark mirror. She had expected this. Not the words, not the exact faces, but the moment itself when silence would prove more powerful than any defense. The captain straightened, trying to reclaim control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. This situation is under review. We'll resolve it quickly." His voice carried down the aisle, but his words fell flat. The passengers weren't convinced anymore. From the back of the cabin, a man in a hoodie stood halfway. Resolve it. You're humiliating her. That's what you're doing. A ripple of agreement spread again. Some passengers nodded, some whispered, some simply watched with new intensity. The younger attendant's eyes darted nervously between the crowd and Maya. She seemed to shrink under the weight of her own doubt. For the first time, she muttered something not in line with protocol. "Captain, maybe we should just verify." But she stopped when the older attendant shot her a glare sharp enough to silence her. Phones kept recording. The red lights multiplied, and the more they multiplied, the smaller the crew's authority seemed. Maya lifted her eyes slowly, scanning the rows of passengers. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at them, one by one, as if weighing whether the cabin would stand with her or watch her fall. The young woman across the aisle answered that unspoken question first. Her voice was firmer now. "You don't get to erase her twice, not while we're watching." Her words landed like a strike of lightning. Not loud, not shouted, but undeniable. And for the first time, the crew realized they weren't just dealing with one passenger anymore. They were dealing with an audience ready to judge, record, and remember. The aisle stirred again, this time with heavier footsteps. From the galley at the front, a senior flight supervisor emerged, his navy jacket pressed sharp, silver wings gleaming against his chest. He carried himself like a verdict, not a man. His nameplate read H. Dyer. He didn't waste time. "What's the holdup?" His eyes swept the row, pausing on Maya like she was an item out of place. "This seat is not hers. Clear her out." The young woman filming across the aisle tightened her grip on her phone. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Supervisor Dyer's gaze cut toward her, icy and dismissive. "Put that away. Filming crew procedures is prohibited." But more phones had risen since the last confrontation. A quiet forest of red lights blinked across the cabin. Dyer noticed, and his jaw tightened. Still, he pressed on. He leaned closer to Maya, lowering his voice but not his contempt. "You think sitting here makes you first class? It doesn't. It makes you a trespasser." The word hung in the air like smoke. Passengers reacted instantly. Gasps, whispers, a sharp intake of breath from the teenage boy in row 6. The businessman with silver hair frowned openly now, muttering, "That's not how you speak to a paying customer." The older attendant, emboldened by his supervisor, added fuel. "She refuses to comply, refuses to show proof. That tells us everything we need to know." Maya stayed still. Her eyes flicked once toward the young attendant, the one who had almost spoken up earlier. The attendant shifted uncomfortably, caught between training and conscience, lips pressed tight. Dyer straightened, raising his voice for the whole cabin. "Let's make this simple. She's not authorized to be here. She is denied service. Effective immediately." Those words, "denied service," were louder than the engines outside. The declaration turned the cabin into a courtroom, passengers into witnesses, and Maya into the accused. A woman in pearls clutched her purse closer, whispering to her husband, "If they said she's a fraud, maybe she is." The man in the hoodie at the back rose a little higher. "Denied service for what? For sitting in the seat she bought?" His voice rang down the aisle. Several passengers nodded, murmurs rising, a tid forming. Dyer cut him off. "Sit down before you're removed as well." His voice cracked now, strained under pressure he hadn't expected to face. The young woman recording refused to lower her phone. Her voice was clear, steady. "You're making a scene, not her." The cabin had split, half wary, half outraged, all watching. Maya finally shifted, not rising, not speaking, just crossing one leg over the other. The movement was minimal, but it drew every eye, still calm, still silent, still refusing to bow. Her silence was no longer just resistance, it was indictment. It was proof that the storm wasn't coming from her seat, but from the uniforms surrounding it. And as Supervisor Dyer turned to signal security, passengers realized this wasn't about a ticket anymore. It was about dignity, stripped and tested at 30,000 feet. The cabin was no longer quiet. It buzzed like a hive disturbed, whispers and gasps rising with every second. Supervisor Dyer stepped closer, his polished shoes grinding against the thin carpet. He didn't hesitate. With one sharp motion, he reached for the seat pocket in front of Maya, pulled out her boarding pass, and tore it clean down the middle. The sound was soft, paper-splitting, but it landed like thunder. Passengers gasped aloud. A woman clutched her pearls tighter, her lips parted in shock. The teenager in row 6 blurted, "You can't do that." His mother tried to hush him, but even she looked horrified. Dyer tossed the shreds onto the tray table. "There," he said, his tone smug. "Now you have nothing to hide behind." The older attendant smirked, adding under his breath but loud enough for the aisle to hear, "People like her always think a piece of paper makes them equal." Those words sliced through the cabin. A ripple of anger surged. The man in the hoodie stood up fully now. "Say that again. Go on. Say it louder so everyone can hear exactly what you meant." The captain raised a hand, trying to maintain order, but his voice cracked. "Enough. Security's on its way. She's being removed." The young woman filming shook her head, her phone steady. "Removed for what? For sitting in her seat? For being calm while you humiliate her?" Her voice was trembling but firm, conviction outweighing fear. Then came the worst blow yet. The older attendant leaned over Maya's shoulder, close enough that his breath stirred the air. "You don't belong here. Not in this seat, not in this cabin, not in this world of ours." His words weren't policy. They were venom. Gasps erupted. A businessman with silver hair slammed his laptop shut. "That's it. I've heard enough." His voice carried weight, years of authority. "You're destroying the reputation of this airline in real time." Maya still hadn't spoken. Her silence was louder now than their shouts. She sat anchored, unmoved, her gaze fixed ahead. And then Dyer made the final mistake. He reached down, snatched the leather folio resting against Maya's leg, and held it up like contraband. "Confiscated," he declared, "until we verify who you really are." The folio slipped open slightly in his grip, revealing only a glimpse of embossed letters on a contract inside. He snapped it shut quickly, not noticing the passengers who had caught a flash of corporate logos. Phones tilted higher, dozens of cameras now, red lights blinking like stars in a night sky. The man in the hoodie raised his voice again. "That's theft, plain and simple. You're not enforcing policy, you're covering your bias." Dyer's jaw clenched, but his voice faltered. "She's a fraud. That's final." The cabin murmured louder, a chorus of disbelief and outrage. Even those who had doubted earlier now shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were watching not a protocol but a public humiliation. Maya exhaled slowly, the only sound from her since the ordeal began. Calm, steady, deliberate. She lifted her eyes to Dyer at last. And though she didn't speak, her silence was a verdict. "Every word you said, every action you took, has already condemned you." The storm had broken, and everyone on board knew there was no turning back. The torn boarding pass still lay in two jagged pieces on the tray table. The stolen folio dangled in Dyer's hand. The cabin buzzed like a courtroom on the edge of a verdict. And yet Maya Jordan sat steady, spine tall, voice finally breaking her long silence. "Enough. One word, low even, but it cut through the air sharper than any shout." Passengers stopped whispering. Phones steadied. Even the captain hesitated. Maya reached calmly into the side pocket of her jacket and drew out her phone. No rush, no trembling. She tapped once, lifted it to her ear, and spoke with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "Rachel, Protocol 7, Inishat now." On the other end, her executive assistant's voice came through crisp, efficient. "Understood. Logging this incident, live feed engaged. The board has been notified." The cabin shifted. Those closest leaned in, confused but curious. The young woman filming whispered, "Did she just say board?" The man in the hoodie muttered, "Something's about to break." Dyer scoffed, raising the folio like evidence. "A phone call doesn't change the fact you're trespassing." His words rang hollow, desperation leaking through. Maya didn't look at him. She kept her gaze forward, voice steady into the phone. "Confirm passenger manifest and seating log for flight 272, seat 3 Ampere, booked under Jordan. Cross. Check with shareholder registry." "Oh," Rachel replied instantly. "Confirmed. Your ticket is active, paid in full. You are listed as majority shareholder, 28% controlling stake." Her words weren't loud, but the phone's recording amplified every syllable. The businessman with silver hair leaned back, eyes wide. "Shareholder?" he whispered. The captain's posture stiffened, as though turbulence had rattled the cabin. But Dyer shook his head, clinging to denial. "She's bluffing. Anyone can make a phone call." "Oh," Rachel's voice carried again. "Maya, do you want me to escalate to corporate compliance? I can patch them in live." Maya's answer was measured. "Do it." Gasps rippled down the aisle. The passengers realized this wasn't theater. This was power quiet, procedural, undeniable. The older attendant stammered, "Shh, she's faking. Don't fall for it." But his voice cracked under the weight of disbelief spreading through the cabin. The young woman filming lowered her phone slightly, awe flickering across her face. She's not bluffing. She doesn't have to. Maya turned at last, her eyes locking on Dyer. Her voice remained calm, but every syllable was steel. "You tore my pass. You stole my property. You called me a fraud in front of witnesses. And you think I need to shout to prove who I am?" She leaned forward slightly, her gaze cutting through him. "I don't raise my voice. I raise consequences." Ugh. The words landed like a verdict. Phones caught every second. Passengers exchanged glances, some astonished, some ashamed, all riveted. Rachel's voice returned, steady as ever. "Corporate compliance is on the line. Do you want me to put them on speaker?" Maya nodded once. "Yes. Let them hear everything." And in that moment, the balance shifted. The cabin was no longer a stage for humiliation, it was a witness stand. And Maya Jordan had just taken control of the trial. The phone line clicked, and a clear, professional voice echoed into the cabin speakers. "This is Angela Brooks, head of corporate compliance for Skyspan Airlines. We are monitoring this incident in real time. Passenger Jordan, your identity is confirmed." The words didn't just travel through the air, they detonated. Gasps erupted across first class. The businessman with silver hair sat forward, eyes narrowing. "Jordan? As in Jordan Aviation Group?" His voice shook, not with doubt, but with recognition. The captain's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The authority he had clung to dissolving in front of 50 witnesses. Supervisor Dyer's grip on the leather folio faltered. This isn't possible," he stammered. His voice, once sharp as a whip, now cracked like thin glass. Maya rose slowly from her seat. Not rushed, not dramatic, simply deliberate. She stood tall in the narrow aisle, her presence suddenly towering above every uniform that had cornered her. She turned first to the passengers. Calm, steady, she spoke so every phone, every witness could hear. "My name is Maya Jordan. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Jordan Aviation Group. I own 28% of this airline. And tonight, you've all seen how your crew treats one of its owners." The cabin erupted, gasps, whispers, even a few scattered claps from those who had doubted and now saw truth laid bare. The young woman filming nearly dropped her phone in shock. "She owns the airline," she whispered to herself, breathless. The man in the hoodie laughed, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. They tried to throw out their own boss." Dyer staggered back, the folio slipping from his hands onto the carpet with a dull thud. He muttered, No, this is a mistake." But the words sounded hollow, already drowned by the weight of revelation. The older attendant's smirk vanished. He looked from Maya to the passengers, then to the phones pointed at him, panic replacing arrogance. Maya's gaze swept the cabin, unflinching. "This isn't about a seat. It never was. It's about what you think someone should look like to belong here." Her eyes locked on the captain, voice sharper now, every word slicing clean. "You thought authority gave you the right to humiliate me. What you forgot is that I sign your checks." The businessman with silver hair nodded, muttering to no one in particular. "She's telling the truth. I've seen her name in filings. She's on the board." Phones tilted higher, capturing every angle, every face unraveling. The tide had turned. The cabin was no longer a cage, it was a stage, and Maya Jordan had just seized the spotlight. She leaned slightly forward, her voice steady, almost quiet, but amplified by the silence gripping everyone else. "You mistook silence for submission. That was your last mistake." The words landed like a gavel slamming down. Passengers erupted in applause this time, louder, firmer. Some stood halfway, clapping. The young woman filming wiped her eyes, whispering, "Finally." Even the teenage boy cheered under his breath, his mother no longer silencing him. And there, in seat 3 Ampere, the woman they had tried to erase was no longer invisible. She was undeniable. The cabin clapped as if the walls themselves demanded justice. Passengers rose halfway from their seats, phones raised, capturing every trembling second. The applause wasn't polite, it was judgment. The captain's composure fractured. His uniform still held its stripes, but the weight behind them had vanished. He opened his mouth, shut it again. Nothing came. Supervisor Dyer crouched for the leather folio he had stolen. Dozens of cameras zoomed in, recording the shame in his hands. "Leave it," barked the businessman with silver hair. And Dyer did because for the first time, The power wasn't his. The younger attendant shrank against the galley wall, her eyes darting to Maya as if silently pleading for forgiveness. The older attendant tried bravado instead, muttering, "This is a setup." But his voice cracked, and the passengers laughed bitterly. From the back, the man in the hoodie called out, "You didn't need a setup, you humiliated yourselves." Cheers followed, louder than the hum of the engines. Across the aisle, the young woman's video hit upload. Notifications buzzed instantly. They tried to kick out the airline's owner, number Jordan Justice. Her screen showed the count climbing. Hundreds, then thousands. The teenage boy whispered, "It's going viral." His mother no longer hushed him. Her own phone was raised, recording. Maya didn't move. She stood calm, still as an anchor in a storm. Every clap, every camera, every gasp confirmed the truth. She hadn't needed to prove anything. They had proved it for her. And in that moment, every uniformed crew member realized the cabin was no longer theirs. It belonged to the witnesses, to the cameras, to the woman they tried to erase. The clapping softened into silence, but the silence was heavier now, charged, expectant. All eyes were fixed on Maya Jordan, standing tall in the aisle, calm in the wreckage she hadn't created but now controlled. She reached down, lifted her phone once more, and spoke with measured clarity. "Rachel, execute removals, effective immediately." The line crackled. Then Rachel's voice came crisp and unwavering. "Confirmed. Revoking access for Supervisor Harold Dyer, Senior Attendant Carl Mason, and Attendant Ellen Walsh. Lockout initiated." The change was instantaneous. Dyer's ID badge vibrated against his chest with a sharp electronic buzz, the green light on its edge flashing red. He fumbled at it, pressing, swiping, but the badge was dead. Carl's tablet blinked black. Ellen's handheld device rebooted and froze at the login screen. Gasps rippled across the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, filming closer. The businessman with silver hair muttered, "It's over." The older attendant, Carl, shook his head violently. "You can't do this. This isn't legal." His voice cracked, panic stripping away every ounce of his earlier arrogance. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Legal?" She stepped toward him, her eyes unwavering. "You ripped up a paying passenger's ticket. You confiscated property that wasn't yours. You called me a trespasser in a company I own. What's illegal is thinking there'd never be consequences." Ellen clutched her frozen device, eyes wide, whispering, "It's gone. My access is gone." Her words trembled out into the aisle, recorded by 3 different phones. Dyer stumbled backward into the galley, face pale, sweat dripping under the harsh cabin lights. "You can't. You don't have the authority." Maya cut him off with the clean precision of a verdict. "I don't just have the authority. I am the authority." Phones captured the line instantly. Passengers murmured, a few even applauding again, the sound sharp and final. Rachel's voice returned through the speaker. "Maya, lockouts complete. Their profiles have been flagged for permanent termination. Compliance is documenting live." The crew looked like hollow uniforms now, stripped of their authority, their tools, their shields. They weren't officers of the airline anymore. They were just employees, former employees, standing in a cabin full of witnesses who had seen their collapse in real time. Maya lowered her phone. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her face was carved from calm resolve. "This flight will continue," she said, her voice clear, carrying down the aisle, "but not with them in charge." And the cabin erupted again, not in chaos this time, but in vindication. The cabin was quiet now, not from fear, but from awe. The very people who had doubted, whispered, even mocked minutes earlier, sat straight in their seats, phones lowered at last. They had witnessed justice unfold without shouting, without chaos, only truth and power revealed. The captain lingered at the front, his face drained, his authority in tatters. For the first time, he looked small inside his own uniform. Supervisor Dyer and his attendants stood frozen near the galley, badges dead, futures gone. Maya returned to her seat. She didn't rush. She didn't celebrate. She simply placed the torn boarding pass pieces gently on the tray table, as if to remind everyone what had started this storm. Then she lifted the leather folio from the floor, brushed it off, and set it on her lap. She looked out the window for a long moment, the runway lights glittering against the night. Finally, she spoke not to the crew, not even to the passengers, but to the cabin itself. "Respect isn't an upgrade. It isn't a privilege. It's a requirement." The words landed soft but final, like a gavel's echo. The young woman across the aisle lowered her phone slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. The teenage boy whispered. She didn't even raise her voice. His mother nodded, almost reverent. The man in the hoodie leaned back, muttering with a grin, "That's real power." And as the engines rumbled, preparing for takeoff, the passengers knew they hadn't just witnessed a confrontation. They had witnessed a shift, one that would outlive the flight, the videos, even the headlines. Because tonight, a black CEO had shown the world that justice doesn't need volume, it only needs truth.